So what I'm going to show you today is we're going to merge this Megatron picture with this picture of a desert. And what we're going to learn about is sometimes when you merge two pictures together, the coloring and the lighting just doesn't work. No matter how good your selection is, like Megatron, if he's in this red desert picture, he should also be tinted red. So we're going to learn how we can do that. Also, the lighting is really high contrast, like really dark shadows, really bright light. This Megatron picture, it's not too far off from that, but it's not the right contrast. So we'll learn how to adjust the contrast of pictures to enhance the realism of your combinations. Also, we're gonna, when we put Megatron over here, he's not gonna have a shadow, and that's gonna look really weird with that very bright light source. So I'll show you how you make your own fake shadows, and I think you'll find that with those skills, you're merging together, your abilities to merge things together will be way better. You'll be able to make much more realistic stuff happen. First of all, I'm just going to talk about this Megatron picture for a second. I did not cut this out. And look like how annoying that would have been to cut out all these little tiny holes. That would have been painful. So to speed things up for you, you can often find pictures that are already cut out. And I'll show you how I went about doing that. If I go to Chrome, I'll just back this up. I showed this last class. I searched for Megatron in Google Images, and what I did was I clicked on Search Tools, and I went to Color, and I chose Transparent. You can also sometimes do a pretty good job of adding PNG into this, because PNGs are files with transparency in them, but I think this is probably the safest way to do it. Transparent, and hey look, there's my picture. But you can find other pictures of Megatrons, including like the classic, oh actually I love this one, that's so good, that Megatron, and it will be a transparent background. And how you know is because when you look at the picture, it'll have that checkered background. It looks like kind of a checkerboard there. That means it's transparent, and guess what, you don't have to cut anything out. You don't even have to use selection tools. So you should use selection tools somewhere in your project, but for some of them you can speed your life up by just getting transparent backgrounds. So that's nice to do. So let's do that. I'm going to get Megatron over here into the desert. I'm going to use the move tool. And we're just going to move him over into the desert. Oh, so big. Man, that doesn't work out too well. If I press Control T, I can't even see the little anchors to click and drag on them. So here's a nice little trick. If you zoom in, I'll zoom in here to the top. Whenever you are transforming, you can manually type in numbers to adjust the height and width. So I'm going to just make that like 30% for, whoops, I'm sorry, I'm giving you people seizures here, I'm jumping around so much. I'm going to give it 30% width and 30% height. And check it out, it's just shrunk it down to about 30% of its original. I didn't have to click on anything and do anything. So if you can't actually see the anchors, then that will work out nicely for you. I'll press enter to accept the transformation, and we got a Megatron in the desert. So like I said, what we're going to do is focus on getting the lighting fixed for the Megatron character so he fits in with the desert scene. This, by the way, is a time-consuming thing to do, and I'm not going to spend too much time doing it, so it's not going to turn out perfect, but I promise you, if you do spend a lot of time working on it, you can do amazing things and really get these pictures to merge together. So, I'm going to show you what are called adjustments. And you might have noticed on the criteria that somewhere along the line in these pictures, I'd like you to use adjustments. I'm just going to pause for a second to mention that if you're not looking at the screen right now, you are missing out on some amazing things. So please stop whatever it is you're looking at on your screens and cast your eyes up here. So I'm going to, right now, make Megatron kind of reddish. I'll show you two different ways of doing that. One sort of like the easy mode, where you don't have a lot of control, but sometimes it's good enough. You just want to make something green or make something red. It's pretty good. And then I'll show you the more complicated one that is really hard to use, but will allow you to really get a perfect color balance going on. So here it is, folks. This is the image menu we're going to go to. Man, there's a lot of things inside of Photoshop. You can get lost in all these like ridiculous menus and things. There's just so many. But I'm going to go to Images and Adjustments is where I'm going to start. And I'm going to show you guys, first of all, hue saturation. This is the easy mode one where you just like make something red. So I'm going to click on that and check out the options I get. You can change the hue, which is sort of what color something is. The saturation, which is how intense that color is. and the lightness, which is how bright something is. And right now, Megatron doesn't really have a lot of color in him, so I'm going to choose the option called Colorize. It's going to kind of force that color on top of Megatron. So watch, I'm going to click Colorize, and it's already sort of chosen red as a default. And as I move that slider along, the hue thing, it just goes through the different colors of the rainbow. I'll just zoom out a bit so you can sort of see that menu happening at the same time. Oop, that went a little too far. So you can click and drag the hue slider until you get the color you want. And I think I want to kind of get a yellowy red color. If you change saturation, you just make it more and more intense. So like that's obviously not right, but maybe that is something you want to do with your Charmander to make it fit with Bulbasaur. You want to turn him blue. So maybe that's something you want to do. So I'll just kind of adjust it to somewhere around there. I won't spend too much time on it. Lightness and brightness actually is kind of cool because guess what? Like this picture is probably pretty intense. The sun is behind the character, so you'd expect it to be a little bit darker. I actually am not going to play with lightness too much because I'm going to show you something else that's more fine-tuned to do that. So I'll say OK. I'll click OK, and that's sort of getting the color to merge a little bit better. Now, if you want more control over it, I'm just going to back it up. I'll show you another adjustment. So go Image, Adjustments, and Color Balance. Color Balance will allow you to adjust the colors of the shadows, midtones, and highlights separately. So the shadows are sort of the dark parts of the layer, the highlights are the light parts of the layer, and the midtones is the in-between parts. So you can actually adjust just the highlights. So the shiny parts of Megatron, you can turn those red because they're reflecting the red of the sun. And you can do that separately. So if I click on highlights, for example, I can shift it to red, and just the kind of the bright parts are shifting more than other parts. And I can sort of adjust those things and move them around. As you can tell, you can mess this picture up really good. So it's kind of trial and error. So I'll get it to be a certain area, and then I'll go to shadows and try to make those red. And you can kind of do your best to kind of adjust it and get it to where you want it to go. I'm just going to leave it there because it's boring to watch me play around with this. But I will literally, if I was doing this for March, if I was one of you, I could spend up to 20 minutes playing with these sliders, getting it to be the exact values for this picture. You don't have to do this for all three of your images, by the way. You might want to just do this for one because it is kind of time consuming. I'm just going to click OK and go from there. And Megatron is looking a little bit better, but what's really lacking is the fact that this background image is high contrast, the foreground image is not. It's sort of medium contrast. So one more adjustment I'm going to show you. If you go to Images, Adjustments, and Brightness Contrast, you can really adjust that. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. You can slide this contrast along so that you can sort of make the brights get brighter and the darks get darker, and you can kind of adjust the brightness as well. And I've kind of butchered this picture at this point. It's a little too bright, so I'd probably go back and kind of adjust things because it's not looking so good. In fact, I think what might be a good call is to do the brightness contrast first and then colorize it. So let's do that. So I'll do brightness contrast. I'll kind of increase the contrast first, bring down the brightness, and then maybe I'll do I'll just do hue saturation just to kind of get it going and kind of get it some red in there. And I'll just kind of leave it. I'll just leave it at that, and I'll call that good enough. But you could probably do a better job if you spend some time adjusting things kind of on a slider by slider basis. So that's looking a little bit more realistic. But obviously the biggest thing that's going to make this look fake is there's no shadow. Like there's a sun behind him, you should be casting a shadow. And a lot of your pictures, when you add in something on top of something else, you should probably put in a shadow. So I'll show you two techniques. One technique is going to be just freehand drawing a shadow in there. That will work for most of your projects. For something like this, however, it should be a really stark shadow where you see the legs and the arms like really distinctly because it's such a bright background picture. So I'll show you how to do that as well. So first of all, I'm going to make a new layer. When you make a shadow, you don't just draw it onto the background layer. Make a new layer. And the way you do that, it's really hard to show you, but down at the bottom right-hand corner, I'm going to zoom in. At the bottom of the layers, there's this little button. There's a trash can, that means delete a layer, so don't click that one. The one beside it is create a new layer. It looks like you're flipping a page. So I'm just going to make a new layer. Always a good idea to name your layers, so I'm going to call this new one Shadow. And the old layer, I'll call it Megatron. And shadows are underneath of things, right? So I'm going to click and drag the shadow layer to be underneath Megatron. So first of all, just drawing in a nice, quick, fake shadow. I'm going to use a brush tool. It's the tool that looks like a brush. I know, shocking, isn't it? Here it is. See how it looks like a paintbrush? Click on that. And I happen, from my previous demonstration from the morning class, it's already kind of set to the things I want. But you probably want to choose a reasonably large brush and a very soft brush. So 0% hardness would be a good call. And then I'm literally, on my new layer, just going to start painting in some black. So we'll put in some black here, and you kind of like get it going on, and you can kind of adjust it to look however you want. That alone looks pretty fake because of the lighting situation, but that's probably going to do it for a lot of your pictures. If you got a car on pavement, you can probably just draw in some black and that'll be fine. It's a little bit too intense, so you can adjust what's called the opacity, which you can make like this shadow transparent. Any layer you can adjust the opacity. I'll show you. I'll zoom into the layers over here, and opacity is right up here. 100% opaque means it is solid. 0% opacity means it is see-through. So you can just adjust this to be, say, like 50%. And then what does that look like? Well, now you can kind of see it's darkened it, but it's kind of see-through. So you can adjust the opacity to be kind of wherever you think it should be. I'll put mine at 75, for example. And now it's darker, but you can still see the image underneath. So you can kind of play around with that, and if that works for you, that's good enough, then that's awesome. I saw a student use this earlier this morning. She put a tiger on a beach, and she just put this little subtle shadow right underneath it. Looked perfect. Without it, looked a little bit fake. After that little shadow went in, very little thin, just kind of outline underneath, it was perfect. It looked totally realistic. So that's one way to do it. And the more complicated way is we actually want sort of the Megatron contour to be in that shadow. We want to see the legs kind of coming out. So what I'm going to do is, check this out, I'm actually going to copy the Megatron layer, turn Megatron into a black silhouette, and then cast him down onto the ground. So I'll show you how to duplicate a layer. This is like copying a layer. I'm just going to right click, and up, up, up I go until I get to eventually duplicate layer. Annoyingly, it's right beside delete layer, so a lot of people misclick. So that's a good reason why you should save as you go. So if you screw up your picture, like you can just go back one step. So I'll duplicate the layer. I'll call it Shadow. And Shadow's on top, so I'll just bring it down. I'm going to hide the Megatron layer. If you click the eyeball, it just hides it, so you don't see it for a second. So now what I'd like to do is paint Megatron all black. And if you were my children, who are 3 years old, I have 3-year-old twins at home, their coloring skills are developing. They're trying to color in between the lines, and this is how they color. If this is me, I'm going to pretend I'm my 3-year-old children now, Miles and Ryan. I'm going to try and color in the lines. Nope. Here's how they color. Yeah, there we go. Oh, it sucks so bad. That's terrible. Okay, so guess what? There's an easy way to color in the lines in Photoshop. My children wish they had that in their Thomas the Tank Engine coloring book. You can actually select every pixel on this layer by going to the little thumbnail picture, the little icon there, hold down Control, and then click on the thumbnail. And since this thing's already cut out, it'll just select everything that's on that layer. It doesn't work if you're trying to cut it out in the first place, but if you already cut it out, you'll get to just select everything. And guess what? If you go to Paint now, everything will stay inside of that selection. So I can color with 0 skill and go from there. My children will watch this video one day and be like, Dad, you said I had 0 skill. Oh, I'll ruin their self-esteem. So I'm sorry, Miles and Ryan, in advance. This is your dad. I don't know what I'll do. I'll make it up. We'll go to Playland. We'll have a good time. Okay, so here we go. So we made Megatron into a silhouette. Whoops. So now I'll bring back the old Megatron, and I'm going to use Transform to stretch him and put him down onto the ground below. So I'm literally just going to click and drag it down. I'll just flip upside down. I'll kind of move it up and get it to line up, and it'll start looking pretty decent. kind of move it around, get it adjusted as best you can, and I'll press enter and say, pretty good job. If this is working pretty well because the light is directly behind Megatron, but if it was to the left or to the right, you'd want that shadow to skew to the left or skew to the right. So Photoshop has literally thought of everything you ever might want to do with a layer. So you can go to Edit and Transform, and you can choose Skew or Perspective and do some fun things. So I'll choose Skew, and we'll click and drag, and we can do some fun things where you can kind of adjust sort of which direction the shadow is going. You can click and drag. Oops. It's really hard because I got the triple mouse thing going on here. Hard to click on the anchor. Kind of click and drag things and move them around to really skew that shadow so it's kind of going to the left or going to the right. So you can try out different things under the transform menu. Like I think perspective is pretty fun. We got to accept that transformation first. Go to edit. Oh gosh. Transform, you can try perspective and just kind of click and drag and just kind of stretches it out so it gets bigger as it gets closer to you. You could do the opposite so it gets smaller as it goes away from the character. Just kind of play around with that. Once you have a shadow that you kind of like, you think it's going well, you might need to adjust how fuzzy it is. So if you want to make it a nice fuzzy shadow, you can do one more thing, and I apologize for going everywhere in Photoshop and kind of jumping around, but this is a really useful one. Filter. You can do a bunch of things in filters, but what I want to do is blur. And I'm going to use Gaussian blur because it gives me a lot of control. So think Gauss like the math contest. So Gaussian blur, and you can click this slider, and it just kind of blurs that shadow to whatever kind of level you want. If you make it really blurry, like it gets like out of control, so you probably want to keep it pretty small, but it depends on the picture you're working with. I'll put it to like about here. I'll click OK, and then I'll make my opacity kind of go down. I'll make it like 75% opacity, and it's starting to look pretty realistic. And you can even use the brush tool to kind of touch that up if you want to kind of get it underneath the feet a little bit more. So now we've gotten like quite a bit further to making that realistic. I'd probably spend more time getting those colors right and moving that shadow around. But yeah, it's looking better. So I'm gonna stop the video, and that'll be good.